Cool. Okay, so let's go ahead and start the virtual machine and see if it complains about anything. Yeah, it's still complaining. This time it's a driver issue. But at home it was working, with my home computer. So maybe the processor is different and needs a different driver in this case. So I can look this up, later on and find out, why, it needs a R600 DRI.so and whether it is installed or not. Okay, so I'll deal with this issue a little bit later on, and for now we'll just go back and use the software approach, which will always is always workable. It's just a little slower. Okay, so enough fiddling with the tools. So what we want to do now is to understand what a fragment is. So I'm going to open up this new note here, which I just pushed this morning. It took me about a weekend and some time like that to write it. It's not really that long, but but in order for me to fully understand the concept and how it relates to everything else that we have been doing, that took a little bit of time. Okay, so here we have it.
Where is this fragment at? The notes at?
It is also on Moodle. So if you go to interface programming, it should be right on top of the homework link itself. So when you go to Moodle, you have to go to user interface programming, and all the gray stuff you cannot see. So you can see that the homework is fragmentize the counter app, and then Android fragments is the link right on top of that. Okay. All right. Cool. No problem. All right. So a fragment, or the concept of a fragment, is basically a container of some user interface components. Okay. Then you can say, but activities can do the same thing. Well, fragments are kind of neat because it is kind of like a modular or a module that you can use in an activity. So you can design a fragment just once, okay? And you say, okay, this is the fragment that I need to get all the user information, okay? Name, address, phone number, and so on and so forth. And then you can use that fragment in different activities or different screens of the same app without having to copy the layout over multiple times, okay? But because it's only a fragment, you can also include a fragment with additional stuff on that one activity. So you can say, oh, I want to pull this fragment and that fragment and this extra button onto one screen. Not a problem. Okay, so this is a great way to modularize the design of your user interface, which is also really great when you have when you want to support multiple devices, because on a small screen like your cell phone, even though my Nexus 5 is supposed to have a 1080p resolution, that's pointless, because I can't really if I use my usual font that I use on a 1080p monitor on this little device. Even though the pixels are there, I can't see that, right? So it is useless. But when, on the other hand, if I have a 10-inch device, like a tablet, I can fit more stuff onto that screen. Now, if I use Android TV, then I have a much larger screen to put all my stuff, so I can potentially combine several activities into one single one. Now, if you do not use fragments, then you will actually have to design the layout of multiple activities depending on the device. Then you have to pull the right one. If you use fragments, on the other hand, you can design the fragments so that each one can fit on the smallest kind of screen. So on a smaller device, then you can say, okay, we'll only have one fragment per activity. So you do have to kind of switch between the activities to get everything done. But on the larger screen, then you can say, oh, we can combine all of these fragments onto one single activity so that people don't have to switch between the multiple activities all the time, because you really got a much bigger screen to play with. Is that making any sense? Okay, so that is the biggest value of using using fragments. Now, unlike an activity, a fragment can only be a part of an activity. It's not a standalone thing. It does not replace activity. It is just a module that an activity can include. And as a result, fragments are very useful because they are essentially reusable modules as far as the user interface is concerned. To make one is pretty easy. You just open Android Studio, right-click on the app of the project pane, select New, and then down, I think about 3/4 down from the top, you will see you can choose Fragment. And then Android Studio will prompt for the name and a few other options. And then it will generate both the code, the Java code, and also the basic layout file for that fragment for you. Okay, so let's go ahead and do it. Okay, so let's go ahead and start with a brand new project. Okay, this one is really, oh, okay, I guess it did fail after a while. Oh no, that's just complaining about the virtual machine, but as far as the project itself is concerned, it actually worked. But that's of no concern to me at this point, because I want to start with a brand new project just to test how to make a fragment so that you guys can actually see the whole process. So I start a new Android Studio project, and in this case I will call this one use fragment, just like that, okay, which is kind of like a bad name, but it represents what I want to do. And this one is using API 19 or above, which is good. The minimum API that you need in this case is let's see, honeycomb. So anything that is at least honeycomb is going to be okay. So we'll keep the option. We'll keep our 4.4 KitKat here, and then click on next. I'll just pick one single empty activity in this case. Click next, and we'll keep all the defaults. Main activity as the class name, and then layout name is activity_main. And if I want to maintain backward compatibility, it does have some impact to the code. In other words, if I unclick backward compatibility, then this particular program really cannot run prior to KitKat. If I click this, it will still be able to run before KitKat, but the sacrifice is I will need to import compatibility classes, which I'm guessing add some overhead to the application. Okay, so but I always click this backward compatibility up to this point, so we'll keep it this way at this point. So we click finalize or finish, and now we are starting our fresh application here. No big surprises here. This is all the same usual stuff that we have seen before. Okay, so in order to add a fragment or start to use a fragment, so we go to app, right click on app, go to new, and then go all the way down here for a fragment. So I was kind of right, but it's about 2/3 through from the top instead of 3/4 through from the top. But basically this is how you start a fragment. And you can start fragments with some properties already, but we'll just choose a blank one in this case, because we want to see how do we construct a new fragment from scratch. Okay, so when you create a fragment, it will give you some options. You can choose the name of the fragment, which is the name of the class representing this particular fragment, and also the layout name of the fragment itself. So I'm just going to keep the defaults. When you're using an actual, or where you're working with an actual app, you probably want to change the name. Instead of using blank, fragment, which is totally pointless, you might want to change that to something that reflects what the fragment is representing. But I'm just going to keep the defaults here. Create layout XML, we probably want to do this because unless you want to use a fragment where the positioning of things is completely dynamic based on Java code, this really helps a lot. Okay, it just makes it much easier to deal with the layout and where you want to position the components and stuff like that. Include interface callbacks. It has to do with whether the activity containing the fragment can handle events that are generated from the fragment itself. Okay, so I'm going to check this just to check out what kind of code is generated because of that. So we can talk about that. Include fragment factory methods is basically the same thing. Do we want to include methods so that somebody else outside of the class can manufacture and say, I want another fragment, I want another fragment. So we'll take a look at that as well. It's not like this particular sample program will make use of these features, but I do want to point out what extra code is generated because of those options. All All right, so we'll go ahead and click Finish and let Android Studio create some template file for us. And we'll wait a little bit until the squiggly lines are all gone. Right now, they're all gone. So this is a new file. Okay, your blank fragment.java is a file corresponding to the fragment that we have just created. And when you go to the layout, which is fragment_blank.xml, switch to design, we can now start to do stuff with this new layout. So let's zoom in a little bit so that we can just kind of focus on the area where we want to do something with this fragment. Okay, so I don't think I will need the text field here. So what we'll do is we can go ahead and delete the text view. So get rid of this. Just go ahead and delete it. And this is also a good time to start to introduce the different types of layout that you can do in Android. One of these is kind of useful. I'm just starting to learn how to do it. It's called Constraint Layout. So with Constraint Layout, it always asks you, because you have to add the library, but it's just something that you can take care of internally. Just click OK and you'll be done. Okay, so I'm going to drag a Constraint Layout into the fragment layout in this case. Okay, and it will complain, just go ahead and rebuild the project. The message will go away by itself. There we go. Okay, so a Constraint Layout is kind of interesting because it allows you to specify the constraint of each component that you're putting into the layout. Okay, so you can say, okay, this particular thing is relative to the top and the left edge of the screen. Then it will stay relative to that. And then the next thing can be relative to the thing that you have done before, and so on. So it gives you, a really flexible way of constructing, things on the screen. So what I'll do is I'm going to put in some actual stuff here. So we'll put it in text view, just kind of as a label. Okay. Okay. So once you have a text view or anything, any type of component or any type of widget put into here, the next thing you want to do is to specify the constraints, because at this point it has no constraints whatsoever. So when you specify the constraints, what you do is you drag these points here to where the constraint is. Okay. So what it is relative to. And let me see if I can zoom in just a little bit more. Okay, so we can crank up the zoom a little more, because this way we can I can control these points a little bit better. So I'm going to drag this one up to the upper edge here, and you can see that once it recognizes the constraint, it will turn green, and when you release the mouse button at that point, this bubble is no longer hollow. Now it has a little dot inside. So now this component is always going to be 16 quote-unquote pixels or 16 units away from the top of the containing layout. And I can do the same thing with this one here. I can drag it to the left. So now it is always 16 away from that edge also. If you don't like 16 and you say, yeah, that's way too much, I want to make this an 8, okay, fine. Just go ahead and change that from 16 to 8. And we're done.
Can you manually type in a number if you wanted to?
I believe so. It's just a text window, so you can override this and just type 6, because 6 is not a number that you can choose from. But yes.
Okay.
Okay. So this is text view, and I'm going to change the text here. And by the way, I also found out why there are two text here. One is the actual content of the text field when you run the code. The other one is for demonstration purposes when you're doing the layout. So the one with the ranch, which is the one that is under the mouse cursor right now, is only for display purposes, for the purpose of laying out. The one on top is the actual one. So when you run the app, that's the one that is going to be the initial value of the text field in this case. Okay. So they are both text, except this one is, as I said, this one is what is actually initialized in the element, and this one is whatever you want to display for layout purposes. Okay. So you can say whatever tag says. Okay. But when you run the app, it's not going to say that. Okay, when you run the app as it is, it's going to actually display text view because that is the actual initial value for that particular element. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. It's kind of funky, but that's the way it is. Okay. Yep.
So that's like a developer hint kind of thing.
Yeah, so if you want to make sure that you have enough space, for a long text, editor, then you can specify something that's, kind of long, just to make sure that it looks right, even though you have a long address, for instance.
If you're doing like screenshots of the app itself, and you need to display a certain text at that time, but you don't want it hard coded,
Right.
you could use that.
Yep. So it's good for that type of purpose. It's good for just the WYSIWYG layout purposes, but it's not actually going to be the actual content. So we can when we run this app, we'll see that it's actually not displayed. It will just be text view, which is the one on top that is going to be displayed. Okay. Okay, I'm just going to change this one to top label. Okay, just so that. It's just not text view by itself, which is not very useful. Okay, so we'll go ahead and include some extra stuff. Okay, for instance, I can include an edit box here. It's called edit text, and it is just going to be a plain text kind of editor. So when I drop it, I can drop it anywhere I want. Okay, but then I can specify the constraints. In other words, if I want this box to be relative to this thing here, then I drag this and say it's relative to here. And then I can specify this one. I can make this relative to this edge here. Okay, so let's say that is what I want. I can do it this way. And if you don't like what you have set up already for a particular constraint, you just click the constraint bubble itself, and it will get rid of the current constraint. Now it's gone. Now, what if I want this to be always aligned with the previous item? I can drag it like that. So I'm going to drag this until it clicks to this box here. So now, this one is always aligned on the left-hand side with the item on top of that. So this is a lot more flexible than any other layout approach, even the relative one, because this one let you select, okay, I'm relative to whom? Am I relative to the one item on top? Am I relative to the frame itself? Am I relative to something that is way over there on the other side? It gives you all the extra flexibility to control that. So once again, in this case, I want to change this text box here and specify the name or the actual content displayed here to be whatever tag types. Okay, it's only for display purposes. Okay, when the app runs, that's not what you're going to see.
You might say Darth Vader.
We can do that, sure. Then we have to change the background color to black and all that stuff too. So we'll go ahead and drag in. So we'll drag in one more thing. We'll drag in a button in this case, and same thing. We want to align the top to the element before, and also align the left to the top, label and not the text box. So now, if I change this one, it would change everything else. So when I click on, sorry, go ahead.
Wouldn't if you link the button to the one above it, wouldn't it still everything change anyway?
It will still cascade like that. Yep, it will still cascade. But I don't want the changing of this thing to change this guy either.
Okay.
So now I can change this one. Instead of 6, I can now specify, let's make something that's obvious, okay? So if I change it to 16, you can see all of these are changed as well, because they are both relative to the label itself. So the constraint layout has a lot of really cool stuff that you can do when it comes to controlling the positioning of your elements. And I think it's particularly useful when you're dealing with fragments, because now you can position things to look just right inside the fragment, and then the fragment itself becomes a module that you can include into your activity. And then in your activity, you can put your fragments inside the constraint layout as well. So now you can just have a nested layout control using the constraints. So it's good. It gives you a lot of flexibility. It's, and in fact, the Android website said this is the preferred constraint or preferred way of laying out control elements on screen. So, if you have not used this before, just go ahead and give it a try. It's going to be quite useful. Yep.
Is this only available on fragments, or is this available on?
Oh, it's available on activities as well.
Okay.
Yeah, just basically anything that you can put into an activity, you can do it inside a fragment as well.
Okay.
All right, so we have a
Put
kind
fragment
of.
inside a fragment?
You can put a fragment inside a fragment. I believe they can nest. The way we can tell is whether it shows up on the on this screen here. So if you go all the way down and you see whether we see fragment here, no, I guess not. So a fragment cannot include another fragment, as far as I can see here, because it doesn't show here that fragment is one of the things they can put into it. So that was a good question, and apparently that is not the case. A fragment cannot contain other fragments. Yep.
So it sounds to me like you would use this if you want to reuse the same UI thing on a couple different
Activities,
pages.
right.
Or if you think your app is going to be on a wide range of devices with varying screen size.
Yep.
So that you could combine, like you were saying, on a tablet, you could have 2 or 3 of your fragments.
Yep.
Whereas on a phone, it would just be 1.
Yep, exactly. Yep.
Okay.
But it doesn't really cost you a whole lot more to design everything based on fragments, even though you may not, actually reuse a fragment in multiple activities, or, in the case of a larger device, you may not even choose to do it that way. It doesn't really cost you a lot of things to begin with, but it does open up possibilities downstream as you want to continue to refine your app or support more devices.
Okay.
So it's not a bad way to. It's not a bad investment of your extra time into it. All right, so now we have a simple fragment already done. Let's go ahead and see how we can put this into our activity. So we go to the activity layout, which is here, turn it into the design tab here, zoom in just so that we can see a little bit better what we are dealing with. And once again, I don't need this default text view here. I'm just going to get rid of it. And then just like with the other one, I can go to layouts and put a constraint layout into my activity this time. Okay. So this is my constraint layout. And now the question is, how do I put a fragment in here? And you can see the fragment is a part of layouts from the perspective of the layout editor of the activity. When I go to the fragment and go down to layout, okay.
Here it is.
Oh, fragment is here. So I guess fragments can nest. You can include a fragment in another fragment. So that settles it. I just didn't see this one here because I forgot it's under layouts. Okay, so cool. So now we can go ahead and say, okay, I want a layout inside this particular constraint. And just like any constraint, but the constraint itself, is absolute. So you just have to position it, the right way in the activity itself. But now I want to put a fragment into here. So as usual, we just drag it and try to put it in, like so, and this pops up. As it turns out, there are different types of fragments that are already predefined in Android. So all of these other ones, that actually should be kind of light yellowish on my screen, they are already supported by, or they are templates that Android is supplying. The one that I'm defining is right here. It is kind of pale blue on my screen, and I think that's actually pretty close to what I'm seeing on my screen too. So this is the one that I want to include, so I'm going to click this one and click OK. And it always complains, and it also has a suggestion to fix that problem. So we'll go ahead and pick a layout, and this is going to be the fragment underscore blank layout. And once we pick that, it knows the layout, and we have to figure out how to make the constraint itself large enough to handle this particular layout. So we want to change the constraint layout to include that. So we want to wrap content. Nope, that doesn't quite do it. Make it match parent. It's still not big enough. You can see the faint marks of the fragment that is supposed to be included in here. And this is not draggable.
What's that line?
Looks like the fragment's too small. Stretch the fragment.
But the fragment is, these are the
Yeah.
individual components of the fragment. You mean this thing is too small?
Yeah. Missed it. Closer.
Okay, but does it change the constraint? Nope.
Maybe try view all properties.
Hmm?
Maybe just view all the properties. And then do what you-
But this is the fragment itself, but the constraint is too small. It cannot include the entire fragment.
What's that line going down to?
Which one?
The line that's going straight down, what's that at the bottom of that? Can you change that arrow down there?
Maybe the constraint has a constraint.
It's too constrained.
Well, this is the top level constraint, so it doesn't have any constraint that applies to it. And this is using relative layout. This is, I'm dragging the fragment right here. You can see that it's trying to look for, oh, I know why. Okay, I need to indicate how it relates to the layout itself. So this way it knows, then the layout knows, how much space is actually needed. That is why. So we have to, there we go. So now it should be okay. Because without this, the included constraint layout doesn't really understand how much space is needed by that thing that is inside. But it still doesn't display correctly. Okay, let me see if I can just build it and see if that will refresh the screen. Nope, doesn't look like that's changing it either. The question is it going to display correctly? Okay, so I can run it right now. And what do you think is going to happen when I run it right now?
Should show the L.
Well, we'll give it a try and see what happens. So we'll go ahead and, okay, so we are just firing up the emulator right now. The notes actually say something about what's going to happen when you run it right now. It's not going to work. It's not going to work because there's no object actually created corresponding to the fragment. So it will complain about it. We'll go ahead and see. So if I switch back to the notes, okay, so there we go. So fragment coding, open the fragment layout, okay, and so on. I think somewhere along here it says it's not going to work.
section 5, last line.
Okay. So if you try to run the app at this point, it's going to crash because there's no link between the fragment and the activity. Even though in the GUI it looks like there's a link, it's not there. And I think when we go back here, we can see the problem. Oh, it's still installing the APK. Fine. Give it a moment.
Success.
Yep. Okay, so it is supposed to be running right now. Well, it doesn't crash, but it's not showing anything. But the not showing anything can be because of the constraint, here. So if I put the fragment all the way back on the outside and get rid of the constraint, that should fix that particular problem, the visibility issue. So we'll go ahead and test this one again, just to get rid of the constraint layout, so that cannot be interfering. Okay, it's doing something. Well, it's okay. And it's not showing it either, because there's no linking between those two. Okay, so getting back to the notes, how do we link those two? So linking a fragment to an activity in code is actually necessary. So if we go back to the code of the main activity.java, and right here you can clearly see that there's no association between the fragment and the main activity. It just doesn't do it. There's no linkage here. So the linkage has to do with, in fact, the program did crash. Okay, it did crash. If you look through this stuff here, and let me go back to the first message, or the cause of the problem. It complains right here, unable to start activity component, blah blah blah, and it has to do with.
Fatal exception.
Sorry.
I was just reading the third line on there, fatal exception.
It's a.
It's on the right-hand side of that runtime exception. Scroll right. There it is.
Yep, complains about the XML file error inflating class fragment. In other words, it's having a problem inflating. The inflation actually happens at different places. This is one place where the inflation happens. It is inflating the activity, but there's another inflation that is happening in blank fragment. And this is where the inflation happens inside blank fragment, is under on create view. It has its own inflation. But the problem is, there's no linking between this one and the other one. And the linking has to do with when this is called, it wants to link to the container of the fragment, but it's not linking at this point. Okay, so let's take a closer look at this code. Okay, the first thing we notice is it defines a listener interface. Okay, so this is an interface. The interface is defined all the way at the bottom. It is kind of weird that it would put the definition of an interface at the bottom, but it does. Okay, so this is the interface that is defined inside the fragment, which is called onFragmentInteractionListener. Okay, when the fragment is created, the onCreate call is going to, let's see, it is the onCreate or the onCreate view. The onCreate view is going to be called, and when it sets up, it wants to link to the container which is on top of it. The problem is main activity is not implementing that particular interface. That is the problem of the crash. Well, that's the problem that is causing the crash. Am I okay, or not? Are you guys understanding which part is missing? Okay, let's try it one more time. When we look into the blank fragment code, when the blank fragment is created, it wants to link to whatever thing is containing the fragment. And that is internally represented by a local variable or a property called, okay, I'm just looking for it, mListener, okay? So mListener is something that is used in on attach. So the on attach call, or the callback of on attach, is what is attaching the fragment to the activity. So this is called when those two things are supposed to be linked. Is that okay? We don't have a problem until that at this point. But when we do this part here, the context is going to be our main activity. Our main activity is going to be passed as the context. It wants to attach to the context, which is not a problem. But this call, or this line, is causing the problem. This line is causing the problem because the context is going to be casted into the interface of onFragment interaction listener. But our main activity does not implement this interface. So at runtime, it is causing a problem because Java leaves a lot of binding and type checking and stuff like that to runtime, unlike C++, which wants to do everything at compile time. But in Java, because of the use of interface, it can delay a lot of that checking until runtime. So when the context by itself is an interface as well, okay? So when we try to cast the context, which is really main activity itself, when we try to cast context into this particular interface, which is onFragment interaction listener, that is going to cause a problem because our main activity class does not implement this particular interface. That's why it's causing a problem. This is the line that is causing the runtime error. That's why we have an exception thrown. Yep.
So you say you're trying to typecast the context, right?
It's trying to typecast the context into a onFragment interaction listener.
And then what did you say causes the problem then?
Because it is main that is being passed as the context, but main activity is not implementing that particular interface.
Okay, so what's being passed can't be
Right.
not being typecast.
Yep, and that's what's causing the runtime exception.
Okay.
So to fix this problem, okay,
Can we look at the exception again real quick?
absolutely. So I think this is the exception here. Unable to start activity component. So this is it is coming from inflation exception. Okay, is this the latest? Yep. We have to go to one particular thing that is in one of our files, and it doesn't link that.
Yeah, I saw use activity blank fragment. There was, if you go down just a touch. There it is.
Right here. Yep.
Attach.
On attach, it's on line 83, and it is this exception here.
It's catching.
Yep, because context is not an instance of onFragment interaction listener. But that's because we just, so this is a guard condition, so instead of having a runtime exception here, it is throwing its own exception over here. So it's catching its own problem and throwing an exception instead of doing it the wrong way and then have the exception happening later on.
So where do we see the error? It looks like it's throwing an error that says must implement onFragment interaction listener.
Yes, so we should be able to see that message in here. There we go.
There he is.
Yep.
So dig through that list.
Yep, you have to dig through that list. Yep. It would be nice if this can be grepped. Which I do not doubt that it might have a tool to do that. You can grep through it. Search within, no, that's not going to help, is it? You can copy and paste it into Vim and then search through it, I guess. But anyway, that is the problem. The problem is, it is failing this condition, and this condition is failed because main activity does not implement onFragment interaction listener. Okay, so how do we fix that problem? Just from the perspective of Java programming.
Implement.
implement it, exactly. So we can go to main activity, and now we say, oh, okay, that's an easy one to fix, implements, and then we have to name our blank fragment, and then it has a dot right there. There we go. And the whole thing complains because we have not included that particular package. So, oh, and also we need to actually implement the abstract method. Okay, fine, that's not too bad, because all we need to do is to give it a something that it can use the implementation. It can be blank. It doesn't have to do anything. So we look this up, and we say that we just need a void function that takes URL as a parameter and has to be called on fragment interaction. So I'm just going to be lazy and just copy and paste this over here and give it a body that is actually empty. So now the problem should be mostly gone. Okay, so it wants it to be public. Here we go. And now it's happy.
We don't have to call super?
Nope, we don't have to call super because there's no super to call. Because this is
The
like,
abstract.
because we're just implementing an interface. This is only here because we're implementing that interface. But main activity itself does not natively has a method called on fragment interaction.
And the onCreate is a result of inheritance. OnFragment is
Correct.
a result of
Yep, exactly. OnCreate is a method that it inherits from the inheritance hierarchy, but OnFragment interaction is a whole brand new method that has not existed in this inheritance hierarchy. Yep, question?
No, scratch my head.
Oh, okay. Cool. Okay, so that would do the implementation, and we'll go ahead and try to run this code again. So what is kind of surprising to me is this part is not automatically generated by Android Studio. It does everything else except for this one. Okay, so let's go ahead and try to run it one more time. Okay, looks like it compiled just fine, and we'll go ahead and look at this. Hey, what the? Well, okay, we got to check a few things. The text view is here. The label does not say whatever text says, okay? And then the content of the text box or the the editable text box says name instead of whatever text types. So that shows you that the top text is for the initialization of the actual user interface element, and then the bottom one is only for display purposes when you're using the layout editor. So that's why we have two texts. For the longest time, I cannot tell. Okay, why do we have two of these things? So as it turns out, that's the purpose of those two different things. One is just for like, okay, if this is a mock-up, we need this much space to accommodate the longest address, and then the other one is the actual initialization of the object. Is that okay so far? Okay. So we can do all kinds of stuff here. Okay, I can delete this name. Type whatever I want to, click the button all day long, nothing crashes, but it doesn't do anything either, right? Because nothing is handling the events, okay? All the clicks of the button, all the editing of the text box, all those events are going into outer space, okay? The events are generated, it's just that nobody is listening, okay? There are no listeners to those particular events. So now we have a tough choice.
Aren't we listening? We're just going into that empty routine right there?
No, it doesn't even get there.
Doesn't even get there?
Does not even get there. Okay, so let's go ahead and see why it is not even getting into this thing here, which seems to be the thing to be called whenever there's some kind of activity on the side of the fragment, right? Because that seems like the whole purpose of this existence is because, oh, there's something happening in the fragment. The activity may want to know about it and do something about it, right? Nope, nothing happens. So we go to the fragment code, okay? This is just an interface definition. It doesn't do anything. It's just a definition. On detach, obviously, is not related to what we are doing because it only happens when we are detaching a fragment from the activity, which in our case only happens when we are closing the application. When the activity itself is going to be destroyed, then the fragment has to be detached first before the activity is destroyed. On attach, okay, on attach is kind of useful because we now have a link back, we have a link now back to the containing activity. But what is going to call that subroutine? That is the question. Okay, we see it over here. Hey, obviously that thing is called, and as a result, the activity should be doing something about it. That so-called empty, function should be called, right? And I can put a breakpoint into that thing so that we can see whether something actually happens there. Okay, so let's go ahead and put some breakpoints into this whole thing. We'll put a breakpoint over here. Okay, so just so that whenever on button press is called, we're going to stop here. And then on the other side, we'll put a breakpoint right here. Let me see if I can put a breakpoint. Yeah, I can put a breakpoint at the end of a subroutine, okay? So whenever this is called, it will at least stop and let me know that, well, we got here, even though it's not doing anything. Is that okay? All right, so let's go ahead and run this program, but this time I'm not gonna use the usual run. I'm gonna run with debug, okay? So this is running with debug. We have to restart the app. Okay, so it is connecting, and if it does stop, one of these lines will be highlighted to indicate that we have stopped. So we switch to the emulator. If I can still do stuff over here, uh-oh.
This hasn't finished restarting yet.
Say again?
It hasn't finished restarting yet.
Oh, restarting.
He makes the emulator.
Or it's crashed. One of the two.
Well, it's doing something funky.
Well, you inherited a lot of code.
On.
It's in the camera mode.
I thought it was playing phone there for a minute there.
There we go. Okay, so we are back to here. Cool. I just don't know how I got there. Maybe it's because I swiped something. Okay, so I can type all day long, click the button all day long. Nothing happens to the code. It doesn't stop within the places. None of the breakpoints is being triggered. Why not? Right? So that's the question. Why not? So the question is, why is this not getting called? Why is this breakpoint not being stopped at? And why is on button pressed not being called? And right here, it says right here, rename method, update argument, and hook method into UI event. Well, it is called a to-do for a reason. Because it's not done.
Otherwise it'd be called a done.
Otherwise, it's just done, right? Because Android Studio doesn't know what it needs to attach this thing to. And because it's not attached, it's not getting called. So neither the fragment has any type of control over the user interface elements, nor the activity has any control over that at this point. In other words, we have stuff that is appearing on the screen, seems to be working, but nobody is processing the events. How do we fix this problem? What do you think? Or how many ways can we fix this problem? Okay, that's a better question. Yep.
Can we use an on click on the button in the fragment?
But the question is, when are you attaching that on-click listener to the button? That becomes the question, because there are two places. They're both possible. It's only a matter of philosophy. Do you want to attach the listener from the fragment itself, or do you want to attach the listener from the activity? That becomes the question. So do you want to associate more logic at the level of the fragment, or do you want to defer all that logic to the activity?
I don't know the
Can you
concept.
hybrid it?
Sorry?
Can you do hybrids?
You can do hybrids. I mean, you can have the button being handled by the activity, but the text, the edit text event handled by the fragment. You can do any type of combination. Okay.
What's the cost benefit? Is
is it better to obfuscate and to hide it essentially in those?
If you attach code to the fragment,
Yeah.
then your fragment because your fragment class is always attached to the fragment XML layout resource.
Right.
So you cannot detach that code anymore. In other words, if it is a very simple fragment where you have a label, a text box, and a button that says you accept this, then if you hard code it to be associated with something, then it's going to be always that something. So you can no longer change the actual meaning of that stuff. On the other hand, if you defer up to the activity to decide what to do with the click, what to do when something is edited and stuff like that, then you have all the flexibility in the world and say, oh, when I include this fragment in this particular activity, this is how I want to treat, this is what the button means, okay? But if I use the same fragment in another activity, I can choose the meaning and say that this button doesn't do the same thing anymore. So you have that option when you defer the processing of the events to the activity as opposed to doing it inside the fragment class. Is that okay? Okay. But it doesn't hurt to understand, okay, I want to see how we can do it in one way, how do we do it in the other way? Okay, so it never hurts to do that. So I'm just going to give you the mechanical way of doing things, but you kind of have to decide for yourself, where do you want to attach the listener? Okay, do you want to attach it in the fragment and specify the code in the fragment, or do you want to do it inside the activity and use the activity to specify the code, the logic to process the events? So that part is up to you to decide. And then everything still ties into MVA as well. Okay, remember model view adapter? So ultimately, we still want the adapters to be doing everything, but the hook to the adapter, or how the adapter hooks to the view, is still up to you to decide. Do you want to make that attachment, do you want to do it inside the activity, or do you want to do it inside the fragment? That is still a question that you have to answer. Okay, but I'm going to give you the mechanical stuff first, okay? So from the mechanical perspective, this is where you can do any type of specification and say, oh, I want this logic to handle the on-click of the button, okay? So in order to do that, we have to change this just a little bit. So I'm going to change this a little bit and say view return value is the following, and then return value, because I have to insert some code between the construction of the view itself and the return statement. So I have to insert some code in between. I can no longer just say return blah blah blah. Okay. So inside here, okay, the inflator is basically what is happening with the inflate call of the inflator is it is taking this particular thing out of the resource, which specifies a particular layout. Okay, what is in this fragment? Oh, we got a text box, a text view. We got an edit view, and we also have a button, and those are located here, there, and there, and they're all inside the constraint layout. That's specified by fragment underscore blank, okay, as a part of the XML document inside the package, okay? So that is just plain text describing what should be in the fragment, but nothing is being drawn. There are no objects corresponding to the constraint, the text view, the edit view, nor the button at this point, okay? So the inflation is taking this specification. It is understanding what is the container of all of this stuff, which is passed by the Android operating system. And I cannot remember what false stands for, but it's a flag to indicate something, but I cannot remember what it was. But that's besides the point, okay? The point is, when we get back from this call, we end up with all the stuff being created. In other words, there will be the representation objects will now be present. They will be available. Okay? And this particular return value is the view that is containing all of that stuff. Is that okay? So this is one place we can do that attachment. So we'll insert some code here. So the first thing we will do is we're going to say, well, let's see if we can get back into those things. Okay? So we'll say view And this is going to be, I'm just going to test the text view itself. So we'll go ahead and say return value dot, nope, it wants to try expression catch exception.
You have to declare a variable there.
Oh, right, okay, so, because I should not use the same name. So this is going to be text view, or the label. Let's change the name to label. It's going to be return value dot find view by ID. So find view by ID turns out to be a method of the view class, and then activity is actually a subclass of the view class, and that's why we can use it over here. And then we'll say r dot ID dot, and I think it is just the label. Oh, maybe I didn't give it a name. Top label, there we go. Okay, and a semicolon. Okay, so at this point, I'm just thinking, okay, we should be able to access it because the inflator is inflating based on the XML document that describes the layout. So at this point, we have all of that stuff created, and they have the associated ID, which is just an integer associated with that particular label. So I should be able to find it, but I want to confirm that, okay? Before I move on any further, I want to confirm that this label is actually going to have the reference to a particular view. So I'm going to put a breakpoint here, and I'll go ahead and run the program in debug mode again, just to make sure that this is going to work. Okay, so we want to go here. Okay, so I think it is. It's not getting here. No, it has to get here in order to run this app. So are we actually debugging? Launching app. There we go. Yep.
Your question is roll sheet?
Nope, no roll sheet today.
Let's say we have a text, just a regular text that you only want to display when you're debugging in like a debug build, not a release build. Is there a way to do that automatically?
I think the best way to do debugging is to use, I don't know, remember the name, but there are ways that it can generate a log.
Well, not so much debugging. I just wanted to display that when it builds the debug version of the app versus the release build, it like has a text box that says debug on the top right of an app. But I wanted to turn that off and hide it when I do a release build. Is there a way to do that? Hide an element?
Well, you can always specify your own logic to do it, but I don't know whether there are any built-in Android Studio features to do that. So this is
set a flag,
Huh?
and if that flag is set, it just displays some element.
Yeah.
Just tap the screen 7 times. Put it in developer mode.
There you go.
but it's not this is not getting called. That is puzzling. Because onCreateView is something that really should be called by the caller. Okay, let me put in another breakpoint that has to stop. Okay, so this one has to stop. So we'll go ahead and run this one more time, because we definitely will stop here in debug mode. And it's not stopping there. So something is not right about the way I start the debugger.
Maybe you need to stop first.
Okay, hit stop. Start it.
Does it get a little check when you? Does it get a little check in the
Okay.
stop point?
There we go.
Yep, we stopped.
Yeah, a little check. Is that what it is?
So we stop here first, and then the other one we should stop there as well. F9 is continue to execute until the next breakpoint, so I'm pressing F9 right now. And we stop here too. Okay, so it's just the way I did not stop the running first, and then I was thinking that if I click this, it would actually restart the whole thing. That turned out not to be the case. Okay, single step. So after I single step, I can look here, and you can see that label is now actually instantiated. So this is a way to, for us to retrieve the individual components inside a fragment. Is that okay?
But the find view by ID, did it know which labels were in the fragment, or is that
Yes,
just
it
all-
knows which one because I specified the ID of that label. Because r.id.top label is the ID associated with that label within
But
the
inside the
fragment.
space r.id, is it all only the labels of the fragment?
Say that one more time?
Inside of r.id,
It's universal.
universal.
Yeah, so basically all the IDs of all the activities and all the fragments, they all go into r.id.
And if I picked one that wasn't inflated,
Then it would return a null. So that's a good question. So if you pick the wrong one, okay, so let's go ahead and stop the program, change this code so that we are using something that is not a part of that fragment. So r.id, we pick, we pick the fragment itself. It is not embedded within itself, so this should not be able to find it, right? And then we debug the code one more time. Okay, so we start this.
it's already inflated.
Hmm?
It's already inflated.
Yep, but it still won't be there. Okay, so we get here. We'll skip over this one. F9 will continue execution. Now we get here. F9 is going to step over just this one line, and you can see that label is now null because it cannot find that ID as a part of this particular view. A fragment includes a top view, which includes all of the extra stuff that we define.
Oh, so it's inside the view return value.
Right.
Got it.
Yep. So that's a good confirmation. Okay, that's good confirmation right there. So let's go ahead and stop the program one more time, and this time I want to locate the button. Okay, so we say, where's my button? Okay, and I'm pretty sure this will work. So instead of doing, better change the name here, right? So we change this to a button, and we say, the button, and then we press Alt Enter so that we can automatically include the reference, and it has got two incompatible types because the find view by ID always returns a view, so we can just cast it to a button. Oops. Here we go. Here. And then we don't have a problem. Then we can say if button
If the button.
No, I want to say if button. So we want to say if button does not equal to null. And it's still complaining. Oh, it's the type the button, sorry. Yeah, you were right. And we don't need to compare to null. Okay, there we go. No, I guess we do. Okay. So Java is more tight about type checking than C++. A zero is a zero. What difference does it make? Okay, so if a button is not null, that means I found a button. So this is where I can set the event handler. Okay, so we can say set onClick listener new button dot onClick listener, and then we can specify the actual class, and then inside the class we need a public void onClick view v and open curly brace, close curly brace, and we need one more semicolon over here. So now we can actually specify, okay, when the button of the fragment is clicked, what do we want to do? Well, whatever code you want to associate it with, you can do it here now. Is that okay?
Sure.
So this is how you can attach a listener to a particular control element or control component inside the fragment. This is all inside the fragment class. Is that okay? Okay. What if we want to do this from the activity itself? How do we find a particular user interface element in a fragment as a part of an activity? That's the question, basically. Well, let's go ahead and check it out. Okay. it's all in the notes too. The notes actually has all the description, all the function calls.
This time you should be able to find the view ID of the fragment and then look inside.
Yep. But how do you find it? Because a fragment is not a view. Now a fragment contains a view, but it is not a view itself. So let's go ahead and check it out. Okay, so it really is a matter of looking up the API and dig around a little bit to find out, how do I make that connection? Okay. So over here we can do about the same thing, and the funny part is I can do that as long as I have set content view done before that. So set content view is actually what is going to indirectly call on create view, which actually inflates the fragment itself. Once it is inflated, when it is a part of the activity, now I can access it. Okay. But the way we access it is a little bit kind of funky. I will turn this code into like really multiple steps so we can explain the steps individually. Okay. So the first thing we need to do is to look up a fragment manager. Okay. And this is the part where things can kind of go really kind of bad because there are two fragment managers. The top one says, it is from the package of android.support.v4.app. This is what you need when you want backward compatibility. Since we checked that checkbox earlier when we created this app, that is the correct package, okay? So we actually need the top one. The bottom one is one that you need when you do not click that box and say, I want backward compatibility. Is that okay? Because it makes a big difference, okay, which one you pick. Because even though they're both called Fragment Manager, they are different classes altogether. So they're not interchangeable in any way. So you got to be careful with this one. So we'll pick out the first one, and we say, FM, okay, which usually means facility manager. In this case, it is Fragment Manager. So this is going to be let's see, get Fragment Manager. And in this case, we got two of these. You have to use get support fragment manager, okay? Because this one is for backward compatibility. The other one is not. So the first one, without the support, get fragment manager always returns a fragment manager from the package of android.app.fragment manager. When you use get support fragment manager, it always returns the one that is consistent with the package of the support, v4 support. Okay? And because the app itself had that box checked for backward compatibility, this is the way to do it. Now, if you do not check that box, then you use the other one.
Will you still see them in the list?
You will still see it on the list. Yep. And this is the part where it can get very confusing, because the code will give you the squiggly line. It is actually a compile time error, so that the editor can actually notice that there's a problem. But unless you read really carefully what it is complaining about, then it's really hard to find out why is this not working. This is a fragment manager, but there are two fragment manager classes, and you have to use the right one.
So we actually wanted to rebuild it with taking off the checkbox. We have
I
to
don't know
rewrite
whether
the
you can
code.
do that. Can you do it? I have never tried that to take off one of the options in the project and redo it.
You have to it looks like you have to rewrite the code.
You might need to rewrite the code to do it. Yep. All right. So now that with a fragment manager, we'll go ahead and say, well, we'll only do this if the fragment manager is in fact located. Once again, it needs to compare to null. Fine. Okay. So if the fragment manager is in fact located, then the fragment manager can look up and say, okay, do we have that fragment here? Now, because this particular fragment is a part of the layout, we can use the call find fragment by ID, because there's an ID associated with it. Now, which ID are we talking about? Go back to the layout of the main activity, and then what you do is you go to the fragment and look at the property. It has an ID of fragment. Okay, so that is what we use in order to identify the fragment as a component inside the activity. So it's kind of like the ID of a button or the ID of a text view, except in this case, because it is a fragment, we cannot find it using find view by ID. We have to use find fragment by ID which is only callable inside a fragment manager and not directly from the activity itself. Why so indirect? Why do we have this kind of middle manager thing called a fragment manager? Well, it has to do with what a whole bunch of other stuff that we can do with fragments, okay, which we are not going to talk about today. We are running out of time, in fact, already, for the lecture part. But I do want to finish this part. Okay, so this is the ID. So when we switch back to the code of main activity, now we can say, I want to find a fragment. So you say fragment, okay, and we say frag equals to, and now it says we have multiple choice as well. And that's because fragment, just like fragment manager, has two versions from two different packages. The one that we're looking at here is the correct one. This is from support.v4.app, which is basically for backward compatibility issues. If you choose the other one, which I think is android.app.fragment, that is the one without backward compatibility. So once we click that box when we created the project, everything has to be the backward compatible version and not the one that is not backward compatible. Okay, so this is the right one. So we press Control Alt Enter. Okay, so press Alt Enter. Static import. It should have just done the usual import. Why is it complaining? Okay, Alt Enter. There we go. There we go. So now we can say fragment frag equals to fm dot. Now we can say find fragment by ID. Now you can see that there are two find fragment by. One is by ID and the other one is by tag. What is the difference? ID refers to the ID in the layout. So if you are including a fragment using the layout, then you have to use find fragment by ID. What about the other one? How do we do this? What is it? Why do we need a different one called find fragment by tag? That one is when you are including a fragment or you're linking a fragment to an activity dynamically without using a layout. Then when you're attaching that type of fragment, you have to supply a tag, and the tag becomes the identifier of the fragment. So once again, the first one is when you're using the layout to include a fragment in an activity. The bottom one is for dynamically linking a fragment into an activity, but not using a layout, which is a static way of linking. Is that okay? So we will look at some other examples next week of how to dynamically include or dynamically link a fragment in an activity so that that fragment has a tag associated with it. But at this point, we are not doing that, and that's why we are only using find fragment by ID. So this time we go to r.id, and then the top one is the one, okay, because we simply call that fragment. All right. So assuming that we got the fragment found, so we say if frag does not equal to null. So I'm doing all these error checking just so that we can trace the code all the way down. We can find the fragment manager, we can find the fragment. But once you find the fragment, we can now just say, okay, I need to find the view first of this particular fragment, the overall container view of the fragment. And then once we get that, we can now use find view by ID. Does that make any sense? More or less? Okay, so let's go ahead and drill this down because I do want to finish this because you will probably need this in order to do your homework. Okay, so we'll go ahead and finish this part. Okay, so once the fragment is down, then we can say view overall view. Okay, so we'll take care of this first. Okay, which view are we talking about? And there's only one, so we don't really have to have a choice here. Overall view is going to be frag.getView. So that will give you the view, the overall view of the fragment, which contains all of the other views. Once we get this, the rest are pretty easy. So if overall view does not equal to null, once again, just error checking, double checking, make sure that everything is good up to this point. Then now we can say, okay, since we have this, we can say, where's my text edit box? And I cannot remember the class name of that, but I think it's edit text. There we go. So edit text, we just call it the editor, okay? Equals to, and let's go ahead and take care of this first. Alt, enter. Nope. There we go. So once we have this, then we can go ahead and use find view by ID. So overall view dot find view by ID r.id dot whatever the editor is supposed to use. Edit text is the one. There we go. Okay. And it's squiggly because I have to cast it. Okay, there we go. All right. So if we can find the edit view, then we can say, oh, I want to set a handler for this thing. Okay. So now we can say editor.setOn, and there's a whole bunch of on stuff, because you can say key listener, on click, long click listener. I think that's one for, you can also detect focus change, editor, action listener, drag listener. It doesn't have a text change. Well, we'll do the key listener. On key listener, which means that whenever if there's a typing event in the edit box, this event will be triggered. So we'll say new on key listener, and to finish us, the rest for me, I just have to now specify, what to do with on key. And the return statement is kind of important. It basically says, are we done processing this? And a return of a false means, nope, I don't know how to do this. And the system would then go back to the default action to process that key. If I say return true, that means, I have just handled everything that needs to be done when that key is pressed, and then the system won't do the default operation anymore. So if I do not intend to do anything to replace what the system is supposed to do, the default behavior, I should always say return false. Now, I might have some additional processing before the return false if I want to, but I always want to do a return false just so that the default behavior of editing would still be okay.
Should randomly return true, though.
Randomly change something in the text and then return true.
Yeah, but the key just won't work that time. They'll be double tapping all the time.
That is cruel. That is cruel, because the end user go like, did I just double tap? No, it's good, it's good. Oh, I double clicked again. What's happening to my phone? Right? Okay, so this is good, because now we can put a breakpoint here and say, okay, whenever I click something, do something in the edit box, this should trigger. And the other one is over here, and we can always insert a breakpoint right here to say that whenever I click the button, this will stop. And I can get rid of all of the other ones, just because that's a lot of extra stuff that I don't need. Okay, so we'll go ahead and stop all of the other ones. And with this one, I can move this breakpoint all the way down to here, because we should be able to get drill all the way down here, because all of the other ones should be found. Okay, and let's see. This one we know that it's useless, so we can get rid of that. Doesn't do a single thing, right? Go back.
But it's required.
Yes, it is only required because of the way we define the interface. And so if we define the interface not to require anything, then we still need the implements, because that is how we can associate an object of main activity to a reference that is based on fragment interaction listener, which is required because of mListener. Now, you can change all this code. I mean, the structure of this code can be changed entirely as long as you still have an onDetach that is calling the super onDetach it's cool. If you do not override it, just get rid of this altogether, it's cool as well. Okay, it's just that the default code gives you the callback ability so that the fragment can contact the including or the containing activity and say that, yep, something just happened, you might want to know about it. But we are not using that at all. Okay. Okay. So I think it's time for us to debug this. Okay, it is already stopped. Let's go ahead and just turn on, run it in debug mode. All right, so we got our first breakpoint, which is on-key listener, but this is just for setting the on-key listener, which is fine. This is good. It confirms that we can, in fact, find the object corresponding to the editor box in the activity instead of in the fragment. Okay, so it's just the significance is just that. Okay, we can find it. Okay, so we'll go ahead and press F9 to continue execution. And now the program should be running, at full speed, or has it stopped here? Okay, it just stopped with the set on key listener, which is the other one. And the app should be running right now. So we click the button. The button processing logic is inside the fragment itself, and that's exactly where we stopped. So we are stopping here, which is inside the on-click handler in the anonymous class that we create, from which we created an object to pass to set on-click listener. Okay, that's a mouthful. But it is the code specified in the fragment class, okay, which is great. Okay, so you have a way to attach a listener inside the fragment class. And now let me press F9 so that we will continue the running of the program. And this time I'm going to click on the edit box and type something. Until I type something, the on key is not going to happen. But as soon as I type something, it should stop. Uh-oh, it's not stopping. Okay, so on click is still happening, but on key is not happening. Okay, why is it not happening? Okay, so clicking should not trigger it, but if I type something, that should trigger the on key event. So maybe I did not attach it correctly. Okay, let me just read this code one more time. Set on key listener, new view on key listener, which is the name of the interface, and it is overriding the on key. Double check that. This won't impact your homework assignment because your homework assignment only involves a button. Well, okay, make it 2 buttons. But we know buttons work. So let me do the on key Android. Okay, interface definition for a callback to be invoked when a hardware key event is dispatched to this view. The callback will be invoked before the key event is given to the view. This is only useful for, okay, there we go. Hardware keyboards. A software input method has no obligation to trigger this listener. Don't.
Don't use that with the emulator.
Sorry?
Don't use that one in the emulator.
Yeah, we just have to run an emulator that has an actual hardware keyboard, and it will trigger it. All right. Well, since we are here already, might as well just finish it. Okay, let's close this. And actually specify something that actually has a hardware keyboard. Create virtual device. This is what's going to chew up your hard drive space. If you have a persistence drive, creating all of these AVDs will actually take up quite a bit of space. Okay, so we need something that actually has a keyboard, and I think there's one here that actually has a keyboard. Tablet, no. One of these things actually has a keyboard.
Slider.
Slider? There we
Probably
go.
will.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So we'll click this. Click next. And we just need one of these versions. Whatever it is. Nougat. Okay. So
Why does it
it's
have,
recommending this. Huh?
Why does it have 4 of them? entities?
Because the ABI is different whether you're using the x80, the 64-bit architecture or the 32-bit architecture for the emulator itself.
Gotcha.
And so that's why there are 2 for each. And then there are 2 API levels that both share the name of Nougat.
Gotcha.
Nougat. So that's why we have these all of these options.
Gotcha.
So we'll pick this one. Let's see, accept, next. Yeah, just the other day I was cleaning up my room and I found my Trio, my Palm Trio, that actually has a hardware keyboard too.
And the stylus.
And the stylus. Yep, exactly. And an insanely long battery life, compared to any type of phone today. I think that thing only needs to be charged like every 5 days or something like that. Nope. So I boxed it up, took out the SIM card, reset the software to get rid of all the data that I have, and it's now sitting in a box to be not donated, to be shredded by those centers. Because I don't know anyone that would buy it. Do you guys think if I send it to a donation center, somebody would actually buy a Trio?
Sure.
I don't think so.
Someone who's starting a museum, maybe.
I think the museums have enough, Trios.
They made a lot of them.
Sorry?
They made a lot of them.
Yep. It was a great device. I mean, as a device, I just click cancel. Dang. Okay, do it one more time. Slider. We got it already. Click next. Okay, so we want to use software so that we don't have to deal with that problem. Enable device frame around it to mimic the look of a real Android device. Sure, why not? There we go, got it. So we'll go ahead and run it. Okay. Cannot launch, virtual device name contains invalid characters. Could not find virtual device name, blah, blah, blah. Okay, let's make it simple. Slider, okay, that should be okay. That wasn't even my name, it was suggested by the system. Okay, there we go. Click start. Yay, it's starting up. Please have a hardware keyboard.
It's got a hardware slider.
I don't see, oh, there we go. We got the interface starting up. It's a tiny device. The screen is much smaller, and that's why the logo doesn't display correctly, which is kind of interesting because Google or Android is actually making all of these images backward all the way back to the slider. And where's my keyboard?
Click the 3 dots on the bottom. It should give you. Don't forget the marshmallows.
Directional pad, fingerprint, virtual sensors.
It might not show up till you actually need the keyboard.
Well, it does have the rest of the system. It's just that the keyboard is, the actual keyboard is missing. Or
Can you type with the your actual physical keyboard?
I can. Let's see if that works. So we'll run it again, and this time we use a slider. I'm pretty sure the method itself does work. I just want to see it, before I conclude today's lecture. It starts the whole device again. And meanwhile, I can look it up. Okay, so we want to look up slider, keyboard, Android. Yep. Still starting up. ADP1. I wonder what that means. Advanced setting. Okay, so let's see if there's anything else that I can specify here. Amount of RAM, heap, internal storage, custom skin. Okay, what are my options? Keyboard, enable keyboard input. That's just, because it's just, saying that my PC keyboard will interact with the emulated keyboard of the emulated device. Oh, it just restarted again. I think I did not give it enough RAM. Okay, let's get rid of this. Cancel this. Take a look at how much RAM I'm giving to this guy. Well, I think that might be the problem because I have 1.5 gigs of RAM allocated to the other device, and the newer version of Android is probably taking more juice to run. So we'll go ahead and change this one to also have that much RAM. So we'll have 1.5 gigs thereabout of RAM. SD card. Enable a frame around the Android emulator window that mimics the look of a real Android device. Click on Show Advanced Settings for more options. Well, you're already there. Okay, finish. I'm just being very stubborn.
Okay, so when I enter my name and hit return, it hit that breakpoint. Is that what it's supposed to do?
Yeah.
Okay.
Return. What do you mean by return? The actual return key?
Well, I typed it in on my little device there.
Oh, okay.
And then hit the return. It's got a little blue arrow at the
Mm-hmm.
bottom.
Okay. So that's what it takes to trigger the on key. But I'm just being very stubborn on, trying to get the hardware keyboard out of this thing. Okay, I take it back. It's the emulated hardware keyboard. How about that?
The emulated hardware keyboard.
Yep.
Okay. And you were typing with your regular keyboard.
Yeah, yeah. But that
See,
did
mine
not
wasn't-
trigger the on key.
Mine wasn't working, but I think you had a selection there that makes it work.
Okay.
The
I think it's the
keyboard.
enter key that works. So the enter key is what triggered the on key event to happen.
Right.
But all of the other keys do not.
Okay.
So as you're typing, it doesn't generate the on key, but when you press the enter key, that is the only one. Because the documentation said, the emulated keyboards are not obligated to generate the on key event. It doesn't say that it won't. It's just that it's not obligated to do it, which obviously is a kind of really awkward of saying things. Okay, so I can look at this part here. So right here it says, a software input method has no obligation to trigger this listener. So instead of saying, a software input method does not, it says has no obligation. I wonder, one of these lawyers, turned into a developer and then could not really develop, so they send that particular person to become a tech writer. So this is directly borrowed from some legalese, in legal documents. Okay, it doesn't seem to want to work. All right, I'm gonna close this and just use the enter key. See if the enter key is gonna trigger it. Okay, one more time. Does any one of you have one of those curved monitors? I'm just kind of curious how well those work. No? Okay. Okay, application is running. Excellent. So we can just go ahead and type stuff. Yeah, my keyboard here, my PC keyboard is not hooked up. So the enter key, but there's no enter key here.
The little blue one down with the check mark.
This one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. There we go. So that's the only time it triggers the on key is when you click on that check mark.
Okay. Well, it thinks that's a physical keyboard on it, I guess, right? According to the language.
Well, I guess it's a language. I think the language says it's not obligated, which also means there are some occasions where it will trigger the on key, but it's just not obligated to do that.
But the
It's
text
just-
view doesn't have an on-change event or something, or on-text change? Because you put that in there just
There's no
to-
on text change. That's the thing. The edit view thing has no edit text has no on view change on text change event. So let's go ahead and look it up. It's Android edit text thing. So first of all we have to look at the inheritance hierarchy. The one right on top is basically a static text. So I don't think it has text change in it either. So we just look up on text change, and it defines context, but not that. So when we look up on click, set on, okay, those are from the superclass, so it won't show up here. Okay, I guess we have to expand all of the inherited stuff too. Public methods, these are specific only to that. So we want to look up all of these and text view. There we go. Okay, so on editor action listener. Set a special listener to be called when an action is performed on the text view. I guess that will do it, right?
Sounds like it.
So it's basically any type of action on the editor, that should do it. And then set a special listener to be called. Okay, so let's take a look at this class. Interface definition for callback to be invoked when an action is performed on the editor. So that might correspond to what you were just mentioning, text changed. So let's go ahead and try that. Okay, go to here, stop the execution, and I will set it up here. Editor dot set on what was it again? Editor action. Go double click, and we want to say new. Go and put a click here. Put a breakpoint over there. Get rid of those. Give it a try. That did not stop it. If I press any key, that did not stop either. If I click this, then it stops. So it doesn't really help. It's not much different from on key. So you cannot intercept, the editing session. So it's not like it can generate one event per change. Now in cisp363, we found a way to get around this problem. You set up a timer, and then just periodically, every 100 millisecond, you check and see if the content of the edit box has changed.
Polling.
Polling, yes. We had to use go all the way back to polling, to emulate the effect of, yes, we can actually tell when the text has changed. Which is not the preferred way of doing things, but if you do need that kind of thing, this is the way to do it. So there you have it. Okay, but the basic mechanism is done. Okay, the basic mechanism of how to attach code to either the fragment or the activity is now done. Okay, so your homework assignment is based on what we have just talked about. So when you go back to the assignment, so what you need to do is to use a fragment to represent the user interface of the counter. Okay, so you have to replicate the design, put it into a fragment. Then use the fragment in the main activity. In this assignment, the view should be associated with the fragment itself, so it is completely specified here that I want it to be associated with the fragment, but not the activity containing the fragment. You probably want to review the material on the MAV and the fragment modules. There's no need to change the name of the project, so you can turn in the project as it is, which is non-MAV counter. When you're all done, zip up the project just like with your last project, upload it to your Google Drive, and then share the link with me using the HTML editor. So basically the same way of turning it in, but this is slightly more involved. So are we doing okay so far? Okay. So I think for the most part, you can borrow the code from MAV, the module MAV, and just go straight all the way down to, is it this one? Count model. Nope. To go past this a little bit. I think it's right here. There we go. So this is the code to attach, so that the adapter talks to the activity. So you will have to change all of this stuff here and move this code into the fragment. But then the main challenge that you will have is how do you link your adapter to the fragment? Okay, so that would be a point that you have to decide, okay, we can only do it here or we can only do it here. Because somebody has to do it. Somebody has to create the model and associate the model with the adapter, and then associate the adapter to the view, which is in this case in your homework assignment, that will be your fragment. So in this particular code, it is the association is done in MAV setup, which is a whole new class, but we're only using the static class to do it. So the whole thing is done in MAV setup dot this, in parentheses this. So this really should be either still be in activity, which is the first point where you have control, or you can move it into the fragment. But the question is, who actually knows the model? Okay, who is actually going to do all this association? So that's up to you to decide. Is that okay? So for the most part, you can borrow code from here, but you have to keep in mind that all of this code is going to be in the fragment class. So the way you locate things and associate the listeners will be slightly different from what we do here.
So we can handle the buttons inside the fragment or inside the activity?
No, you have to do it inside the fragment. That's what the homework assignment is calling for. So the fragment is directly interacting with the adapter, and the activity stays out of this for the most part. The only thing you might want the activity to do is to do the setup, but after the setup, all the interaction is directly with the fragment and not with the activity. Okay? Any questions? Okay, so if there are no questions, I'm going to stop the lecture at this point.